Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kristen, and today I want to talk about the long overdue fountain pens that I used in the month of September 2024. Yeah, we're midway through October and I'm just now reviewing these. So yeah, it's been a while. I don't know what's going on with this right here. My raven doesn't look so much like a raven anymore. All right, so here are my pens. I will go through these one at a time. I have these separate because these are fancy pens that I really don't want to. Actually, this wood is fine. I'll leave that right there. But I will leave these two Urushi pens on the pillow. Let's move these off to the side so that I can talk about them one by one. Okay, so the first pen that I used, or the first pen on the list, is the Say pen, my Graffiti Urushi pen with a broad cursive italic nib. I had it inked up with Diamine Merlot. It was one of my bottled inks for the month. This pen and ink pairing was perfect. I really enjoyed how the ink goes from red to burgundy as it dries. It's very subtle, so it's not like a true red going to a true purplish burgundy red, but it was more like a cool tone red that dries down to something that's a little bit more purple leaning. Kind of like the colors in this pen. I really loved how it matched very well with the pen, whether it was wet or dry. And I love the feel of this broad cursive italic nib. It just makes the pen even more endearing to me. This pen is gorgeous, and I still love to hold and look at this one from time to time. The next pen is my Skogsy pen, Cholla, Betwixt Between Studios resin with a double broad nib. I have this one inked up with Kobe ink milk chocolate. This pen and ink pairing was really fun, actually. I loved how well the ink color matches the brown and the pink in this fountain pen. And using the double broad nib was much more fun than I would have guessed. I loved using this pen for headers, but it was just fun to write large and bubbly every now and then. So I really enjoyed this one. The next pen and ink pairing was the Scopus pen's Tree of Life with a medium nib, and I had it inked up with the Sailor Mizutama collaboration ink called Yosooi. The narrow section on this pen was actually quite comfortable. I like the juxtaposition of the two diameters, this narrow section and the wide pen body. It was really nice. My only complaint was that I was not able to enjoy the color of this ink because there was an insane amount of evaporation in the ink. It looked black most of the time I picked up the pen to write. It did lighten up over time throughout this writing sample, but it may not have been an issue if I had used the pen more often. So this pen is best enjoyed when used regularly, or if you just have an ink color where you don't really care about evaporation, like a black ink. This is my Newton Pens Small Majestic Fountain Pen in Peach Peacock. It has a medium nib, and I have it inked up with Diamine Weeping Willow. Oh my gosh, I really don't think that I could have planned a better pairing for this pen. I love that I can see both green and peach in both the ink and the fountain pen. The match excites me every time I use the fountain pen. And I am so very tempted to purchase a bottle of Weeping Willow just to use with this fountain pen. I loved the experience so much that I doubt that I'll be able to find a better match for this fountain pen. The next pairing is my Pilot Custom 823, the clear model, with a medium nib. I have this pen inked up with the Sailor 2024 Pen Show ink. I am not going to be emptying this one because I want to really use it until the last drop. It's such a lovely ink, and this is such a lovely pen. I am really enjoying the pairing, and I wish I did have a sample to show you in a large swatch, but all that I have is inside this pen. I haven't yet worked up the courage to try and express some ink to make a swatch card. But thanks, Lupe, for allowing me to ink up my fountain pen at the San Francisco 2024 Pen Show. As I probably mentioned in the Pen Show recap video, I plan to use this pen and write it and write with it until it is completely dry. This is my Leonardo Magnifica Arlecchino. It has a medium nib, and I inked it up with Troublemaker Ink's Hanging Rice. This pen and ink pairing, it's okay. I do love green inks, but this pairing was a little bit underwhelming. It caused me to wonder if I dislike Leonardo's steel nibs or if I just don't like the feel of this nib with this particular ink. I'd love to try this pen with a wetter, more lubricating ink before I decide whether or not I should replace this nib with a 14 karat gold Yovo nib. Or I could just replace this with a Sailor Gold nib. So before I make a decision on replacing the nib, I'd like to try it with a wetter, more lubricating ink. This is my Magna Carta Prince, $12.97 with a fine flex nib. It is inked up with Celadon Cat by Diamine. On this paper, on paper, this pen and ink pairing seemed perfect. However, this pen failed to perform on paper. I really enjoyed the pen whenever it worked, but I struggled entirely too much trying to get the pen to write consistently. Celadon Cat may have seemed like a wet enough ink in the converter, but it is not viscous enough, thick enough to keep the feed wet or to prevent railroading while I splay the tines for flex writing. I can see the potential of this pen, and I am so excited to use a better ink in it, or a more fitting ink for this pen. Okay, this is my Stilo Art wood pen in Japanese maple. It has a medium cursive italic Pilot number 30 nib. It was ground into that cursive italic by Mr. Mike Masuyama. And I have it inked up with Parker Penman Sapphire. This is a writing sample of that ink. Do I have a more perfect pen in my collection? I don't know. This pen, well, actually, like the whole package, the maple wood, the build quality of the pen, the nib, the grind, the ink, it's just perfect. It's all perfect. Now, this is another pen that I am planning to write dry because I really enjoy using it. I enjoy the pen and I enjoy this ink. There's just something about the contrast between the very natural, very warm maple wood pen and this very official and serious blue ink that appeals to me. I really love it. I'll figure that out. Do I need to moisturize my Raven pen? I don't know. So this one is my Esterbrook Estie Raven. It's looking a little ashy in some places. It has a fine nib, and I inked it up with Troublemaker Ink's Purple Yam. I was so excited to use this pen and ink pairing. I seem to love the blackout style pens with dark and moody inks like this one. And this pen and ink pairing reminds me of Visconti Homo Sapiens Dark Age from August when I had it inked up with Waringle For Whom the Bell Tolls. I loved that pairing, and this one started off just as strong. Unfortunately, the ink dried out in the nib, and despite the cushion cap, the ink ended up looking black in most of my writing sessions, especially like right here. There are a few spaces where there's like some really heavy sheen because of the fact that the ink dried out quite a bit. So it's not really like that violet purple color. I can see it very subtly in some areas, but it's mostly looking like a black ink coming from this pen. I think this might have been my most frustrating writing experience of the month of September. This is my Mayfair Pens Noldor model with the Tiffany inspired resin. It has a broad nib, and I inked it up with Troublemaker Ink's Foxglove. This is a beautiful fountain pen, and I love to hold and just massage the material. But this was one of my least favorite pen and ink pairings of the month. And although they look so good together, the ink was too light and too dry to give me a pleasant writing experience. The ink exhibited high shading and was almost illegible while it was wet during the beginning of September. By the end of the month, the ink was too stubborn to even make contact with the paper, which is why I quit. I really just stopped using this pen because it was so frustrating to me. This is a very special pen. Oh my gosh. The resin, I just have to say the resin in this fountain pen, this is my London Pen Co. fountain pen, the Christopher 14 model in the Arabian Nights finish by Jonathan Brooks. I really love how this resin was finished by London Pen Company. It just feels so good. I love this high gloss. It almost feels like a lacquer. I really enjoy the look and the feel of this pen, as well as the Imperial grind on the nib. I didn't get it ground specifically by Kirk Spear. There were some of his grinds available through London Pen Company. So that's how I ended up getting the Imperial grind on this nib. I bought it with the pen. Now this right here is Diamine Jingleberry. That is the ink that I have in the pen, and it was such a pleasant writing experience every time I used this pen. There was a little bit of evaporation up here at the top, but the ink in the pen performed well enough and wet enough that it wasn't even an issue for me. I was just fine seeing it a little bit darker and a little bit more red up here at the top, and then coming back to the original color down here, matching perfectly with the fountain pen. But every time I used this pen, it was just a beautiful experience. I really like this pen. This is my Urushi Studio India fountain pen. I'm just going to call this Teal, a Teal Urushi. It has a medium scythe nib ground by Kirk Spear, and I inked it up with Diamine Cashmere Rose. There was a little bit of dry out here as well in this fountain pen, but not very much. It bounced back pretty quickly in the writing sample. I do have to say that the scythe grind on this nib is quite, I don't want to call it severe, but it is very sharp. So I had to be very, very careful in the way that I used this, using as little pressure as possible throughout the writing session. And so the less pressure that I used, the more pleasant the writing experience was with this pen and ink pairing. I actually like how these two colors complement each other, the teal and the rosy pink. I really, really like that. So just to give you a better idea of these ink colors at the beginning of the month, this is how they looked on Tomoe River paper to your right and Iroful paper on the left. I really, really loved how they looked. The only ones that I was already struggling with were the Magna Carta prints with Celadon Cat by Diamine, and the Mayfair pens Noldor Tiffany with a broad nib inked up with Troublemaker Ink's Foxglove. This one, it was just railroading every time I tried to write with it. And then the Mayfair pens Noldor just seemed like it was too dry with this ink in there. So everything else performed really, really well, even though some of them became a little bit drier than I would have liked by the end of the month. The Tree of Life, as well as the Esterbrook Estie Raven, those were a little bit drier, but there weren't really very many writing issues outside of those two, like performance issues, I should say, outside of those two fountain pens. So that's that. Now that I've mentioned that, I will go ahead and rank these fountain pens from most to least favorite. My number one experience was my Stila Art pen, and then number two was the Say pen. These were just really, really nice. I really enjoyed writing with those two fountain pens, and I don't think that it's been a while since I've had a really great writing experience with pen and ink together. So these two were like really, really great. Third place is my Christopher 14 by London Pen Company. Next is Skogsy Pen's Cholla, which I am so surprised. This is my first and only double broad nib, and it was so much fun to use. Next is my Pilot Custom 823 in clear with the Pen Show ink by Sailor. It was just a really pleasant, really reliable, luxurious experience whenever I used that pen. Next is my Newton Pens Majestic Small with a medium nib. It was just magical with Diamine Weeping Willow in that pen. And after that one is my Urushi Studio India in teal with that medium scythe nib. It was always a really pleasant experience, but only if I was gentle with the nib. After that is the Scopus Pen's Tree of Life. I was pleasantly surprised with the way that pen felt whenever I wrote with it. I know that the ink was just so much darker, but I still enjoyed writing with it. I would rather change the ink than actually get rid of the pen, so I would just write with a black ink so that I could enjoy the writing experience of this pen. Next is my Esterbrook Estie Raven with a fine nib. I wish I would have had a different ink in here. And the same goes for my Leonardo Magnifica with a fine nib with a medium nib inked up with Troublemaker Ink's Hanging Rice. I would love to see a wetter, thicker ink in here. A Magna Carta Prince, same sentiments. I would like to have a wetter. Let me bring these in so you can actually see what's going on. Same with the Magna Carta Prince. I'd love to have a wetter, more forgiving, viscous ink so that the pen performs well whenever I try to flex the nib. Lastly and least is the Mayfair Pen's Noldor model with a broad nib. I don't think it's the performance of the fountain pen itself, but just the combination of this pen with Troublemaker Ink's Foxglove. It does not like Foxglove. All right, so those are my pen and ink pairings. I have learned this month to not use so much pressure with some pens and to consider using different inks for pens that just don't perform very well with drier inks. Now, are there any regrets? Because these are all San Francisco pen purchases. Do I have any regrets as far as the pens that I purchased at the show? I might regret the actual broad nib on here, but I really do love this pen. I don't know if I regret this pen just yet. I would love to find a different ink to go with it because I love using this for headers. And I would be so excited, so glad to have this one to use specifically for that purpose. I'm actually in the market for having a really nice header that stands out against my everyday long form writing sessions. This might be the one that I am the closest to regretting just because the writing experience was not all that great. And the fact that I purchased this finish, this Arlecchino finish. I purchased this Arlecchino finish because my first choice was actually not available when I went to the Leonardo table. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know if I'm just going to put like a nice black ink in here like Hiroshizuku Takesumi. It might be really nice to do that or something else. I'm not sure. We'll see how things go on with me and this fountain pen. But that is it for the September 2024 final thoughts video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.